Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Naila Shujra and these are the headlines. Farmers have shut down India while observing a countrywide strike over agriculture reforms. The strike, backed by 15 opposition parties, followed 3 rounds of inconclusive talks with the government. The protesters have blocked key roads and railway tracks across the country, while exams have been postponed in some states. China has summoned a senior U.S. diplomat to protest against U.S. sanctions on 14 Chinese officials over Hong Kong. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry condemned new curbs and vowed to take reciprocal measures. In the United Kingdom, a 90-year-old woman has become the first person in the world to receive the COVID-19 vaccine outside trial conditions. It comes as Britain has begun rolling out the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer and BioNTech today. Britain is the worst-hit European country from the coronavirus, with over 61,000 deaths. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered over 2,800 new cases and second waves record 89 fatalities in the past 24 hours. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed more than 1.5 million lives and infected over 67.5 million people. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has apologized on behalf of the government after an inquiry into the Christchurch massacre has found a series of failures ahead of the attack. However, the report concluded the tragedy was unpreventable. The inquiry was launched after white supremacist Brenton Tarrant killed 51 people at 2 mosques in March 2019. And in cricket, New Zealand public health officials have cleared the Pakistani squad to leave the managed isolation facility. In a statement, the health ministry said the players posed a very low risk to the community. The squad is scheduled to fly to Queenstown later today ahead of 3 2020 match series starting on the 18th of December. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Farmers have shut down India while observing the countrywide strike over agriculture reforms. The strike, backed by 15 opposition parties, followed 3 rounds of inconclusive talks with the government. The protesting farmers have blocked key roads and blocked the main railway tracks across the country. The protesters forced the shopkeepers to close their markets, while the exams have been postponed in some states. Earlier, thousands of farmers laid siege to Delhi for the past 12 days, choking almost all entry points. This comes after New Delhi passed laws ending the government's mandatory procurement of agricultural produce on fixed price. Farmers say Prime Minister Narendra Modi's reforms expose them to exploitation by private corporations. China has summoned a senior U.S. diplomat to protest against U.S. sanctions on 14 Chinese officials over Hong Kong. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry condemned new curbs and vowed to take reciprocal measures. Beijing has also called for resuming talks to get back to the right track and rebuilding mutual trust. China and the United States are at odds over a range of issues, including trade and the handling of COVID-19. A U.S. study says the number of Afghan civilians killed in airstrikes by the United States and its allies has risen 330% since 2017. It is the highest figure in the first years of the U.S. invasion following the 9/11 attacks in 2001. The Costs of War project says around 700 civilians were killed in 2019 alone. It notes that the U.S.-led airstrikes decreased after the U.S. Taliban peace deal of 2020, but the Afghan Air Force escalated its raids. It says Kabul's airstrikes killed 86 civilians and wounded 103 in the first 6 months of 2020. The report has urged a ceasefire to avoid more civilian casualties and injuries. Iran has flatly dismissed Saudi Arabia's inclusion in the negotiations over Tehran's nuclear program. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh said Riyadh should refrain from commenting on matters above its level. This comes after Riyadh said President-elect Joe Biden must consult Gulf states if he is planning on rejoining the 2015 nuclear deal. Earlier in an interview, Biden said if Iran returned to compliance with the JCPOA, the United States will rejoin the accord. Washington quit the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 after President Donald Trump dubbed the accord weak and unconstitutional. In Iraq, security forces have arrested a high-ranking ISIS militant in western Al-Anbar province. Yahya Rasool, a military spokesperson, said the detainee was the deputy governor of ISIS in Iraq. Rasool said 5 more terrorists, including 2 involved in the 2014 Camp Pfeiffer massacre, were arrested. He said the Iraqi anti-terrorism unit carried out intensive surveillance and intelligence operations in 3 provinces. Iraq declared victory over ISIS in 2017, but its armed forces still conduct operations against sleeper cells active in different parts of the country. Over in the United States, state of Georgia, top election officials have confirmed President-elect Joe Biden's win. Governor Brian Kemp has also pledged the state's 16 electors to Biden. In news conference, Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said ballots were counted thrice. He called Trump's claims of election fraud destructive and disinformation should be rejected. President Trump requested the recount after results showed Biden leading by more than 12,000 votes. Meanwhile, a federal judge dismissed a lawsuit by the former Trump attorney Sidney Powell to sought the overturn election results in the state. A Fulton County court also nullified a suit brought by Georgia man based on improper paperwork. It claimed the state had so mismanaged the election that no one can have faith in their vote was being protected. The United Nations has urged Russia to end its temporary occupation of Crimea and immediately stop transferring weapons to Ukraine. In a resolution, the United Nations General Assembly urged Moscow to unconditionally withdraw its military forces from Crimea. The resolution called on Russia to stop the transfer of advanced weapons systems, including nuclear-capable aircraft and missiles, to the territory. The resolution was supported by 63 countries, while 17 countries voted against and 62 abstained to vote. It was put forward by 40 countries, including Britain, France, Germany, the United States, and Turkey. Russia occupied the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine in March 2014. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has apologized on behalf of the government after an inquiry into the Christchurch massacre has found a series of failures ahead of the attack. However, the report concluded the tragedy was unpreventable. More in this report.
New Zealand has released an almost 800-page report into the March 2019 killing of 51 Muslim worshippers at 2 mosques in the city of Christchurch. It concluded that the authorities could not have been alerted of an imminent attack. However, the inquiry found a series of failures ahead of the 2019 attack. It found that the white supremacist Brenton Tarrant had been able to accumulate a massive trove of weapons, with authorities failing to enforce proper checks on firearms licenses. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the report identified many lessons to be learned and significant areas that require change. The report said the shooter had traveled to India and remained there for 3 months before carrying out the attack.
The report specifically notes that before 2018, the concentration of resources was not based on an informed assessment of the threats of terrorism associated with other ideologies. While the Commission made no findings that these issues would have stopped the attack, these were failings nonetheless. And for that, on behalf of the government, I apologise.
The Muslim community in New Zealand responded to the findings of the inquiry report into the country's worst massacre. Muslim Association of Canterbury said the report showed institutional prejudice and unconscious bias exists in government agencies. It said the Muslims should have been safe here.
We've known for a long time that the Muslim community has been unfairly targeted with hate speech and hate crimes. This report shows that we were right. The report shows that institutional prejudice and unconscious bias exists in the government agencies and that it needs to change. We know this prejudice has led to the lack of trust between our community and government agencies. At this stage, we accept the 44 recommendations.
The government accepted all 44 recommendations made by the report, including establishing a new national intelligence and security agency. The government said it will also act on a proposal for the police to better identify, record and respond to hate crimes.
Romania's Prime Minister Ludovic Orban has resigned after a defeat in the country's parliamentary elections. In a televised statement, Orban said he will not cling to any position as national interest came first. With 95% of ballots counted, the Social Democrats lead by 30% of the vote, with ruling Liberals at 25%. Orban expressed hope that his National Liberal Party will still be able to forge a majority coalition to choose his successor. Despite winning, the opposition PSD is unlikely to come into power as Orban's party has more potential allies to form a government. The election saw a record low nationwide voter turnout of 33%. Turkey has ordered the arrest of 304 military personnel with links to the U.S.-based cleric Fethullah Gulen. Gulen was behind the failed coup attempt in 2016 to topple President Tayyip Erdogan. State media says the operation was initiated by the prosecutor's office in Izmir province and was spread over 50 provinces. It said the suspects, including 5 colonels and 10 captains, are believed to be in contact with Gulen's network. On 1st of December, Ankara had ordered the arrest of 82 military personnel. Since the coup bid, Erdogan's government has expelled more than 20,000 people from the Turkish military alone. In the United Kingdom, a 90-year-old woman has become the first person in the world to receive the COVID-19 vaccine outside trial conditions. Britain is the worst-hit European country from the coronavirus, with over 61,000 deaths. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed more than 1.5 million lives and infected over 67.5 million people. More in this report.
In the backdrop of skyrocketing COVID-19 cases and deaths, an early and effective vaccine rollout remains the only ray of hope. Britain has begun the mass vaccination of its population against COVID-19, becoming the first country in the world to do so. A day dubbed V-Day, health workers started inoculating people with a shot developed by Pfizer and BioNTech. Margaret Keenan, a grandmother who turns 91 in a week, became the first person in the world to receive the vaccine outside of a trial. Meanwhile, in France, after a brief respite of 3 weeks, infections and hospitalizations are rising again.
In the last few days, the level of new daily infections have no longer been decreasing. We need to be vigilant in the face of these recent developments, but we are still far from the goal of getting below the mark of 5,000 new daily cases. Our strategy is adapting in real time and constantly with the evolution of the epidemic.
In Latin America, the worst-hit country, Brazil, has vowed to provide free vaccines to all people. With more than 15,000 deaths in the past week, U.S. officials warned that January will be much worse. The COVID-19 death toll in U.S. has crossed 283,000, with the tally of infections approaching 15 million. The World Health Organization has sounded alarm at the failing healthcare systems in the world's top economy.
The US is accounting for a third of all world cases at the moment over the last number of weeks. The epidemic in the US is punishing. It's widespread. It's quite frankly shocking, to see 1 to 2 persons a minute die in the US, a country with a wonderful, strong health system, amazing technological capacities.
Over in Asia, India's infections tally has surpassed 9.7 million with over 26,000 new cases and 385 deaths in a day. As South Korea battles a fresh wave of the virus, the government has signed deals to provide vaccines for 44 million people. Hong Kong will ban evening dining at restaurants and close fitness centers as part of measures aimed at stemming the fourth wave of infections.
In Pakistan, 89 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. These are the highest single-day deaths in 5 months. Health officials say the death toll has risen to 8,487. Meanwhile, 2,885 people tested positive for the virus overnight. Officials say there are more than 44,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. The health ministry says out of more than 423,000 countrywide cases, over 370,000 people have recovered. The United Nations has declared the 27th of December as the International Day of Epidemic Preparedness. In a statement, the United Nations proclaimed the day to highlight the importance of prevention, preparedness, and partnerships against epidemics. Vietnam's United Nations Ambassador Dang Di Q, who introduced the resolution, said COVID-19 is not the first pandemic, nor will it be the last. He said this pandemic caught the world off guard, but it should serve as a wake-up call for improving preparedness for future pandemics. This comes days after hundreds of world leaders took part in a virtual session of the international body in response to COVID-19. Prince Harry is suing the publishers of a British newspaper for libel, joining his wife Meghan Markle. She is separately persecuting them over misuse of private information, breach of copyright, and data protection. According to the British media, Harry's lawyers filed the lawsuit over a Mail on Sunday article published in October. The article said the prince lost touch with the Royal Marines after stepping down from royal duties in March. Harry had to give up his honorary military titles as a part of an agreement with the Queen and other senior royals. Meghan's lawsuit against the Mail is on Sunday, particularly about the articles published in 2019. They include parts of a handwritten letter she sent to her estranged father, Thomas Markle, in 2018. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Australia has finalized plans to make Facebook and Google pay for its media outlets for news content. The unprecedented laws are due to go to Parliament this week. Talking to media treasurer Jos Frydenberg said big tech firms will have to negotiate on payments with local publishers. He said if the parties cannot strike a deal, a government-appointed arbitrator will decide for them. Frydenberg said that the legislation will help ensure the rules of the digital world mirror those of physical world. It is the first move aimed at protecting independent journalism and has been strongly opposed by the internet giants. 2020 is coming to an end, and Twitter has put out its recap this year for you. Its highlights tweet and the topics that dominated the platform.
The final tweet on Chadwick Boseman's Twitter account announcing the Black Panther star's death at 43 was the most retweeted post on the platform of the year and the most liked of all time. After Boseman, Kobe Bryant was the number 2 most tweeted about celebrity in the United States following the NBA star's death in a plane crash in January. The next most liked tweet of the year was Barack Obama's remembrance of Kobe Bryant. While United States President Donald Trump, himself a prolific Twitter user, was the person most tweeted about in 2020. He was followed by his Democratic opponent and winner in the November election, Joe Biden. K-pop group BTS were the number 1 most tweeted about musicians in the United States for a 4th straight year. After COVID-19, the second most tweeted hashtag of the year was Black Lives Matter, following the death of George Floyd in May while in the custody of Minneapolis police.
Two minuscule pygmy possums have been found on Australia's Kangaroo Island. The tiny creatures have been documented for the first time since the wild bushfires destroyed their habitats last year. The two possums perched on human fingers were found after 20 fauna sites were surveyed. The little pygmy possum weighs 7 grams and has been called the world's smallest possum. Marmosets are some of the smallest monkey species in the world. The animals were reported to be discovered nearly 1 year on from last summer's deadly bushfires. Prime Minister Scott Morrison dubbed the fires Australia's Black Summer, which killed 33 people and razed over 24 million hectares in the country. Pakistanis are sowing the seeds in a fight against deforestation. This comes as millions scattered in the hills and wooded areas around the capital, Islamabad, with the aim of bolstering diminishing forests. More in this report.
Pakistan is on the road to counter the country's deforestation and making it lush green by planting thousands of trees. Experts warn that the country could risk losing all of its forests within the next 50 years if concrete steps are not taken to revive them. For this purpose, the Capital Development Authority and Islamabad Wildlife Management Board have launched a project, Throw and Grow.
Deforestation is becoming a huge challenge for all of us. But in the recent few years, there has been a lot of awareness on this topic, and recently the present Prime Minister is very much particular about increasing the green cover of Pakistan. Projects like these are very important to increase awareness, number one, and number two, obviously, to increase the green cover of the city area.
Workers picked out healthy seeds and placed them in the middle of a mixture of clay and organic compost. The mixture is then rolled into a ball, forming an outer layer that protects the seeds from being eaten by animals and insects. It also provides nutrients for the seeds to grow. These seed balls are then tossed by volunteers in the wooded areas where they can germinate within 3 to 4 weeks.
We have taken 1.5 million seed balls, and every seed ball has 4 seeds. And because this area is more conducive for pine trees, so we have included 4 seeds in this one ball. And these balls are then given away to all the hikers who are coming here. They are given away to all the people who are coming there for picnic. And we've also hired our own 25 different teams who are taking these balls and they are throwing away in the areas where there are less trees.
Project Throw and Grow has been in full swing for the past 2 weeks, and officials say they have so far scattered around 1.5 million seed balls. Hundreds of hikers and picnickers have joined in the effort.
A magical monolith has been spotted on an Isle of Wight beach in England. The recent discovery has sparked speculations that the object may be related to mysterious metal structures seen around the world. A series of photographs posted on social media showed the monolith standing on the beach. The photographer described the metal structure as magical. Since mid-November, various shiny metal monoliths have suddenly appeared and then vanished in the strangest of locations, from the Utah desert to the Romanian mountainside. After a series of these uncanny appearances, the monoliths have generated international excitement. In Sweden, a gingerbread Greta Thunberg was on show at a coronavirus-inspired baking competition in Stockholm. More in this report.
The annual gingerbread competition at the Architecture and Design Museum in Stockholm is usually filled with wide-eyed children and adults marveling at the culinary creations of the nation's bakers. But this year, the COVID-19 pandemic has put a spanner in the works, reflected in the 2020 theme of distance. Despite being closed, the museum received around 100 entries, which the team decided to 3D scan and publish on their website.
So what we've basically done is that we have 3D scanned all of the gingerbread houses that we normally show in this exhibition space physically, and instead we have turned them into 3D versions of themselves. So now you get to experience them as AR models that appear on your camera phone when you visit the website, basically.
Some of the nation's bakers found eye-catching ways to illustrate the year of the pandemic. In one such design, Santa chatted on Skype to 3 piglets. One baker reproduced the head of Sweden's chief epidemiologist, Anders Tegnell, to get the social distancing message across. Being Sweden, there were also 2 creations that featured teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg.
Actually had a lot more last year, so it's quite interesting that it's only 2 this year. But if we look at this first one, you can see Greta when she's traveling on the Atlantic Ocean to New York, which is a quite familiar view to the people that have been following Greta on her travels.
Other entries showed lighthouses or planets of the solar system. The winners of the various categories will be announced on Facebook on the 20th.
The largest Christmas tree in the world has been lit up in Italy's medieval town of Gubbio. In a traditional dating back at 40 years, the entire slope of the mountain Ingo has lit up with lights in the shape of a tree. More in this report.
Every country has its own unique Christmas traditions, but in Italy, there's no such thing as going over the top. The small town of Gubbio in Umbria region holds the record for the world's largest Christmas tree. Usually, crowds line the streets to catch a glimpse of the spectacle, but this year it was streamed live to discourage people from gathering due to COVID restrictions.
Speaking of numbers, there are around 300 neon lights that mark the perimeter of the tree, and there are over 400 colored lights inside the tree. The star you see at the top of the mountain, until last year, was illuminated with neon tubes. But this year, we used 142 meters of white LED strips and 142 meters of blue LED strips. The tree has a height of 750 meters and a base of about 450 meters, the equivalent of 30 football fields.
About 1,300 hours of work were required to build the tree, but for Gubbio, it is more than a decoration.
For us inhabitants of Gubbio, the tree represents a friend, a big brother who is turned on every year on 7th December. We all work on the mountain from September to December, trying to bring this light to Gubbio and honor the patron saint of the city, Saint Ubaldo.
The tradition began in 1981, and this year the organizers hope it will bring some hope and light at the end of a difficult year.
Japan has announced a $708 billion economic stimulus to speed up recovery from the coronavirus-driven slump. The new package will include support for medical institutions, investments, and green energy. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga says the measures will help achieve new growth in green and digital innovation. In a meeting with the ruling party executives, Suga said that it will also help maintain employment and sustain businesses. The cabinet is set to endorse the package later today, bringing the value of the coronavirus-related stimulus to $3 trillion. Japan's economy rebounded in July-September from its worst post-war contraction in the second quarter.
ワクチンについては国内外において治験が複数進められており、
In cricket, New Zealand public health officials have cleared Pakistan squad to leave the managed isolation facility. In a statement, the health ministry said the players posed a very low risk to the community. New Zealand cricket said the squad had been tested for COVID-19 5 times since the arrival 2 weeks ago. Earlier, the measure was taken after 10 members of the Pakistani team tested positive for COVID-19. The 53-member squad is scheduled to fly to Queenstown later today ahead of 3 T20 match series starting on 18th December. The team will also play 2 test series starting from the 26th of December. It's now time to take a look at the weather around the world. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at Indus.News.